This film has cast a long shadow over countless childhoods, standing as perhaps the most captivating disaster movie series to date. Let's revisit this cinematic masterpiece together. In the dense rainforest along the Amazon River, there is a legend that an ancient tribe lived in seclusion and worshipped the python as their patron saint. Excited by this lore, anthropologist Stephen, along with director Terry, assembles a film crew to delve into the jungle, aiming to document this enigmatic tribe, but the complex terrain and changing weather made them search for a long time with no luck. But while traveling, they came across a man crying out for help after his boat was damaged by a tree branch and ran aground. Upon seeing him, the crew quickly rescued him. Stephen tells Paul they're still going deeper and can't take him back out, but Paul is unconcerned, claiming that he can follow the group's route. Mateo observed Paul thoughtfully. His ability to navigate the perilous Amazon alone was a clear sign he was no ordinary man. The crew, lulled into complacency by modern comforts, failed to recognize the potential dangers. Intrigued by Paul's skill in primitive fishing techniques, they bombarded him with questions about his occupation, to which he replied that he lived by hunting. Upon learning the crew's mission to find a mysterious tribe, Paul claimed he had seen them and boldly offered to lead the way. The excited crew immediately set off, unaware of the dangers that lay ahead. A few days into their journey, they spotted snake totems along the riverbanks, partially confirming Paul's claims. Yet, they still couldn't locate the tribe's settlement. Paul suggested the recent tides might have obscured it, assuring them that venturing downstream would lead to the village. However, Stephen, applying his anthropological knowledge, refuted this. He reasoned that frequent flooding in the area would force the tribe to relocate to higher ground, a more plausible pattern of human settlement. Stephen then directed the crew to head upstream in a different direction. As night fell, the boat anchored at the river's edge for rest. Two photographers disembarked, ostensibly to record the sounds of insects, but with other intentions in mind. Soon, Denise noticed a sudden, eerie silence. The insect noises had stopped. Something lurking in the dark lunged at them, prompting a frantic escape. It was then they saw Paul, gun in hand, aiming in their direction. Alarmed by the gunshot, the others rushed out, shining their lights towards the source of the sound. Only then did they see what they were dragging back. It turned out that the attacker was a wild boar. After a night of close calls, the crew continued their journey, pressing onward into the unknown. For some reason, a rope suddenly fell and tangled around the propeller. Someone had to dive in to cut the rope off. Stephen, hearing this, immediately suited up and jumped down. However, they were unaware that all of this was part of Paul's scheme. Soon after cutting the rope, Stephen suddenly grabbed his neck, trembling and struggling in the water. His companions noticed something was wrong and quickly jumped in to rescue him. In Stephen's mouth, they found a venomous bee. Watching Stephen suffocate from the poison, everyone was panicked and at a loss. Paul stepped forward, made a small incision in Stephen's neck with a dagger, and inserted a tube for shared breathing, temporarily saving Stephen's life. Though it was strange to find a poisonous bee in the oxygen mask, the urgent matter was to get him to a hospital. Paul suggested taking a tributary he had recommended the day before, which could get them out of the Amazon 2 days earlier. Danny felt something was off and asked Terry to make a cautious decision, but she had no choice. The boat eventually entered the tributary. Soon, a fence spanning the entire river blocked their way. Confronted with questions, Paul calmly took out some explosives from his bag. However, Terry disagreed. Believing the fence was there for a reason, Paul didn't care. It was Stephen's life that was being delayed. Terry remained silent but eventually agreed to Paul's plan. She asked Gary to accompany Paul to set up the explosives. Just then, Gary felt something approaching in the water. At the critical moment, Paul pulled him up, and the thing in the water disappeared after flipping a few waves. After lighting the explosives, they quickly returned to the boat. The fence was soon blown to pieces. Splintered wood flew everywhere, knocking all the fuel barrels into the water. Numerous small snakes were also thrown onto the boat, and Mateo quickly washed them away with a water gun. Although the river was cleared, they only had 1 barrel of oil left. Not enough to get the boat out. They had to keep moving while figuring out a plan. Fortunately, they soon spotted another stranded boat. Paul decided to lead a team on foot to search it. Paul and Mateo quickly boarded the boat. While Danny was filming in the water, he felt something approaching from behind, but there was nothing when he turned around. The strange sensation made Danny also quickly get ashore. In the cabin, a photo revealed that Paul definitely knew the boat owner. He quickly tucked the photo away and skillfully found a well-preserved snake skin. It turned out this was his real purpose for coming here. After obtaining the treasure, he signaled to leave quickly. However, Mateo slipped and fell into the water. When he stood up, a python suddenly sprang out and bit him, then constricted him to death against a tree trunk. Mateo tried to call for help, but the tight grip on his chest rendered him voiceless, and he ultimately died in the snake's belly. When Paul and the others returned, they realized Mateo was not with them. Danny hurried back to search but found only a dropped flashlight. Confused, they decided to wait for Mateo. Paul guessed that Mateo had probably been devoured by the python and showed them the snake's skin.
Is snakes out there this big?
Whatever shed it has grown since then. This skin is 3 or 4 years old.
He claimed that if they worked together to catch the python, everyone could share a large sum of money. However, Terry, unsure of Mateo's fate, suggested waiting another night before deciding. Warren, terrified of the python, screamed to leave immediately.
If it was you out there, you'd want us to stay too.
Terry managed to calm him down, and Paul was excited at the prospect of catching the python. A night passed without any sign of Mateo, indicating his unfortunate fate. The group continued their journey in sorrow. Paul shot down a monkey from a tree, intending to use it as bait for the python, but Terry refused. She couldn't risk her companion's life.
Gary? You speak for everybody? Good boy, you speak for everybody?
Gary, realizing the documentary couldn't be completed, suggested finding another way to cover the expenses. In truth, he was enticed by the python's value and had agreed the previous night to join Paul's hunting team. Denise was heartbroken seeing her boyfriend behave this way. Danny, unable to tolerate this, was about to throw them off the boat, but Paul threatened them with a gun. It turned out he was a poacher who hunted rare animals for wealthy clients. Paul was able to control them by force. With relentless baiting, Paul finally succeeded in hooking the python. He quickly reeled in his prey like fishing. Under these circumstances, the python surfaced, its unprecedented size startling everyone. Paul asked Gary to shine a lampshade on the python to blind it, and the python kept flopping in the water. As he watches Paul trying to control the ropes, Danny pulls out a dagger and prepares to solve the crisis, but the snake's tail whipped onto the shore, knocking him down and causing the knife to fall into the water. The tail then knocked over Paul, and the python escaped back into the water. While they searched the calm water surface with a flashlight, the python suddenly emerged and swiftly boarded the deck, wreaking havoc. Denise, in fear, attempted to flee upstairs but was struck by a flying chair and fell into the water. Gary immediately jumped in to rescue her, and the python plunged into the water after them. When Gary pushed his girlfriend to the shore, the python bit Gary's neck and then wrapped itself around him again. Terry quickly picked up a hunting rifle, but Paul stopped her, wanting to capture the python alive. In just a moment, the python rolled into the water with Gary and disappeared. Denise angrily accused Paul of causing Gary's death. Even the timid Warren started to resist, but was ultimately subdued by Paul's force. Later that night, Terry approached Paul alone, expressing her desire to join in and get a share of the profits. Paul was momentarily swayed by her charm, but remained cautious and noticed Danny approaching from behind.
Think I'm stupid?
The next second, Warren knocked Paul unconscious through a window. Fed up with the oppression, they united in rebellion and successfully tied up Paul. They decided to speed up their escape from the jungle. However, the boat soon hit a reef on the riverbed. They had to risk going back into the water and pulling the boat out by tying a rope to a nearby tree. Meanwhile, Denise, left alone on the boat, approached Paul with a knife, determined to avenge her deceased boyfriend. But in the next second, Paul suddenly raised his legs and knocked Denise down. His body and legs forcefully formed a guillotine and Denise was gradually suffocated under this huge force. The others in the water were unaware of this. Paul quickly dumped the body into the water, and its splash drew their attention, but they saw nothing. The next moment, they noticed ripples on the water surface and realized the python was attacking again. They swam frantically towards the boat, but the python was faster, as the distance between them rapidly closed. Paul on the boat had already grabbed a dagger, ready to cut the rope while watching the scene unfold. Warren, seeing his companions in danger, slapped the water surface to distract the python. Putting himself in danger, he quickly climbed towards the waterfall, but the python relentlessly followed. On the boat, Danny and Terry went inside to grab guns to help. Unaware that Paul had already cut the rope, Paul then quickly approached and knocked Danny down with a punch, and started fighting with Terry for the hunting rifle. They were fighting on the deck in no time. Warren was already hiding in the hole behind the waterfall, but the python was following him. Warren couldn't hold back his fear any longer and jumped down from the top, but the python reacted faster and caught Warren in the air and rolled him back. And then the python took him into the water. the large tree entangled by the python also collapsed, falling towards the boat below. Seeing this, the people fighting on the boat quickly jumped into the water. Stephen, who had been unconscious, was awakened by the commotion. Terry climbed back onto the deck first. As she was about to help Danny up, Denise's corpse suddenly surfaced, shocking them. At that moment, the python emerged and bit Danny, preparing to drag him into the water. Terry quickly grabbed a shotgun and fired several shots, killing the python. Danny then safely climbed aboard. However, the next second, Paul rushed up and tackled Terry again, picking up the gun to finish them off. At this critical moment, Stephen, who had woken up, stabbed Paul with a tranquilizer dart. Paul, in a rage, grabbed Stephen's injured neck, but his consciousness started to blur. Danny stepped forward and knocked Paul into the water with an elbow strike. Not noticing the tranquilizer gun falling in as well, the survivors sped away on the boat, but soon ran out of fuel. They arrived at an outpost and decided to check for fuel. The scene of devastation and shed snake skins indicated that this place had also experienced a snake disaster. Fortunately, the fuel here was still well preserved.
Welcome.
But then, Paul, who had miraculously survived, tied them up and woke them with monkey blood. Since they killed the giant python, he planned to use them as bait to attract another one. They stood up in panic, but it was too late. Another giant python was already attracted. Paul quickly pulled a net tight with ropes and tied it to a rusty pipe, planning to use the tranquilizer gun on the python. However, the python's strength was immense, breaking the decayed pipe. The snake and the man looked each other in the eye. Paul fired a single shot, then climbed up the ladder to escape. The enraged python pursued and bit Paul, pulling him and the ladder down from midair. The hunter became the hunted, a meal in the python's belly. While the python was feeding, Danny and Terry finally untied themselves and tried to escape, but Danny was knocked down by the python's tail. The python turned and chased after Terry, cornering her in a chimney. Danny grabbed a pickaxe and nailed the python's tail to the ground. He then knocked over all the fuel barrels and used a water hose as a fuse to ignite the gasoline from a distance. Terry climbed out from the top and jumped into the water just a second before the explosion. The burning python fell from the exploded chimney and struggled into the water. Just when Terry was relieved to have survived, the resilient python broke through the wooden planks and emerged again. Danny grabbed an axe and chopped off its tongue, finally killing the python. However, the loud explosion attracted a mysterious tribe. What awaits them next?